Yes. I'm all over YouTube because of my classes. They're all over there.
Okay, so it's recording
Rosamond
now.
has recently started a YouTube page for this group, and so
That's
this
awesome.
this would be good material for that.
You
So
can totally
thank
put
you,
it on there.
Erica.
No problem.
I'm
Well,
gonna mute myself, otherwise I'm just gonna chat with Erica.
that'd be fun. Can y'all hear the stomping too badly
No.
upstairs? Okay, good. I'm gonna leave these headphones on. I can hear it. They're so loud. I have a 2-year-old, and then I have a spouse, and they're just blah, blah, blah. We got hardwood floors on that level. Well, I am Erica Jordan. I'm super excited to have a nice break from all of the election stress and do my favorite thing, which is talk to students about career stuff. It's like, I love the field of HDFS, but something about just career development for students within this field has become one of my recent passions. And so this is a great break for me. And thank you for inviting me here. I didn't prepare any slides or anything. I just thought I'd do an informal kind of tell you who I am, where I'm from, how I got where I am. I feel like I spent my entire life obsessively trying to plan it, and then it just mostly went in other directions. Not always, but you know, it all works out. But certainly I have spent hours obsessing about various directions that I didn't take. So I'll talk a little bit about that. But in terms of, like, I was born and raised in Memphis, Tennessee, spent my whole life in Tennessee up until I turned 18 and graduated and went to college. Then even then I had an interest in psychology. I had an interest in families. Part of this is because I think I had a very unique family situation. I was kind of born into a 2-parent household. Then my parents divorced. So then I was a kind of child of 2 very involved single-parent households. They were both very involved in my life. But then my mother passed away. So, well, no, first, but I was primarily in her household with my brother. But then she passed away. And so then I was primarily in my dad's household as an only child because my brother went to live with his dad. So it's just, I feel like I've had a variety of family situations. Then because I spent a lot of time in single parent households, I was also hanging out in other people's houses a lot, you know, like my friends or relatives, like when they need somebody to pick me up in between after school activities or whatever. And so I felt like I got to just see a lot about various families. It was really fascinating to me to just kind of, I thought, oh, this is really different. Because I had a lot of autonomy in my household, but, you know, then sometimes I'd be hanging out in a house where there were a lot more rules. Not to say that I didn't have rules, but just the parenting style was a little bit different. And so that was, I think in retrospect, that probably helped to pique my interest, just my own life experiences. But I took a very roundabout way to get into this field. I intended to go to school in Georgia. And I think I wanted to be a psychology major. I've still got a gold book from like high school somewhere in one of these drawers in my home office that talks about like I wanted to work with kids. And so I do think I always had an interest in psychology in general. But somehow by the time it was time for me to go to college, like I never finished the application for Spelman College in Georgia where I really wanted to attend. Maybe I submitted one to UT Knox, University of Tennessee in Knoxville. Maybe, I don't remember. I went on a lot of college tours and I enjoyed them very much. My dad took me on my first college tour to Spelman when I was 8 years old. I was like the only kid sitting there watching the recruitment video in the little recruitment room. Like there's this child and they're like, who are you here with today? My dad brought me here. I'm the one being recruited. So, I mean, it was very much pressed education. Higher education was very much pressed in my family. So I kind of always knew my dad had me on track to go to college and my mother as well. But for some reason, I wasn't too interested in the particular school. I don't know why. When it came to, so suddenly now it's my senior year. I haven't actually finished the applications. And I'm sitting in sociology class, which was taught by a very laid back teacher in high school who, I mean, I guess we learned a few things, but mainly I remember talking to my friends. And I had a very good friend who sat behind me, and he's like, oh, I just came back from Stanford University in Birmingham. And I was like, oh, I flipped through that in my obsessive looking at colleges, but I always just skipped over it because I'd never heard of that school before. And I was like, well, yeah, I'm not going to go to that school. And he was telling me about it, thought it was great. I said, okay, I'm going to go. They had one more preview day left. And so like I went to that preview day, told my dad, he canceled a dentist appointment for me, which was like bonus. I get out of this dentist appointment and I get to go on another trip. Went, visited this school in Alabama, fell in love with it. You know, sometimes you just know you're supposed to be in a place. I just stepped onto the campus and I was like, man, there was a few nice things about it. I was heavily involved in my church growing up, so it had the kind of faith-based access. What word am I looking for? Faith-based influence, excuse me. But it also had a lot of really strong faculty. So very sharp faculty as well, very strong critical thinkers. They had a huge service learning component. So I was very interested in volunteering even throughout high school. So I liked that. I liked just the campus, and it was a small school, and I'd gone to a very large high school where, I mean, they were very good to us. I had a great high school experience, but we truly were a number. Like, I mean, the school was huge. And so it was like a small college. So something about going to a smaller college was nice because, you know, it was these small classes similar to smaller high school size classes. So that was great. But the thing is, I was all over the place with my major. I think that on some recruitment material or something, I wrote that I was going to double major in biology and religion. Then, like, by the time the first day of classes came, I'd already changed my mind to psychology. But then I hopped around. I was all over the place. I had like, who knows how many times I went to the career center. At some point I was nursing. I know because I went back and looked at this and I was like, oh, when did I think I wanted to be a nurse? And I didn't even remember all of these, you know, ideas that I had. Somebody told me about HDFS. And I've got to be honest, I was like, what is that? That is not a real degree. Like, I'm not going to major in that. And like, that was just my knee-jerk reaction of the time. I didn't even look into it. I knew what building they were in. I was like, that's a nice, pretty building, but no, I won't be going over there. Yeah, and then I turned around and still majored in something else. And I also was like, what is that? That's not a real degree. Somebody told me about journalism. I don't know how they managed to hook me to actually take a class. Oh, I do know. I was interested in writing for like a parent's magazine or either a teenage magazine or developing my own. So I was like, oh yeah, you know what? I'll go take one of these kind of intro journalism classes so I can, since I have this interest, but I was still also interested in psychology, and that hooked me. Even though I thought, who would major in journalism? That's a ridiculous major. Why would anybody do it? And then I turn around and I major in journalism. So this keeps happening. I don't learn my lesson when it's time to go to graduate school because I keep saying, you know, all these things that I would never do. And then I do end up actually doing them. So major in journalism. But along the way, like we had something that they called kind of like a cognate. So it's a minor essentially, but I guess a little bit different. But just think of it like a minor. I took some classes in communication studies. The intro to like the interpersonal communication class absolutely hooked me. Now I was already a journalism major by then, and I was far into that. Again, still wanting to work for like a parent's magazine or a teen magazine, and really loving those journalism classes. I liked them a lot, and I had a very good mentor who, even though I was a total brat for one semester, to the point to where, I mean, I'm so glad the man finally retired because he had to have now taken this picture off of the wall of me. It's like a class photo, but I've got like an intentional frown on my face because I was mad about something that had gone the way I didn't want it to go on our student broadcast. I don't know. I was ticked off about something. He's like, Erica, look at your face. Like, what is what is happening here? So he was still a great mentor there and very patient, clearly, despite my just, young adult, typical dramatics. So I was loving those classes, but I also really liked this interpersonal communication thing. Two things: fell in love with this idea of the romantic relationships, that whole field of study. And then also, I'd always been interested in parent-child relationships, but I really fell in love with like attachment theory, and that's where that really hooked me. So that faculty member convinces me to take an upper level class, and then she convinces me to like do kind of like a senior thesis. So I ended up doing 2 senior theses. One was on the teen magazine thing, and then another one was on this parent-child attachment. And thank goodness I did that, because that ended up helping me in a way that I couldn't have anticipated. In my mind, I was still going to do this journalism thing. Then I thought, oh, wait, at some point toward my senior year, I was like, I don't think I want to do journalism anymore. I think maybe I'd like to take this and use this for like child advocacy. I'll do law school. So then I started, like, I actually took the LSAT without really prepping much for it. So I'm sure my score wasn't great. I don't remember what it was, but I remember I didn't prepare it. But I visited some law classes. I was like, oh, I'll do this. You know, because you're just very lost. And then at some point, though, I was like, oh, I don't think I want to do this law thing either. And I, to this day, don't know how. I remember a lot, but I don't know how I finally stumbled across the HDFS master's program. But somehow I stumbled across the idea that that was a thing. And when I looked at the classes, I was like, all of these classes sound amazing, except research methods. but the rest of these topics sound fascinating. And then, long story short, actually, when I got into the research methods class, Rex Cope was my professor. He was at Alabama at the time. He was amazing. He made that class so fun. And actually ended up, I ended up loving, I still have some materials from that class, and I don't keep a lot from classes, but it ended up being amazing as well. I loved my master's program, but I don't remember, it was probably me browsing on the internet, because I had this habit since middle school, really, of obsessively looking at things on the internet, like looking at jobs, taking career tests, looking at colleges. I spent too much time researching and not actually going out trying to do things. But I probably stumbled across it that way, and I was like, this is amazing. I remember I even drove down to campus at the University of Alabama. I don't think I met with anybody. I think I just sort of lurked around, looking around the building, trying to get a feel for what it was like. And I thought, oh, I really feel good about this. And so I ended up applying to graduate school. And I remember like being afraid to tell my dad, I don't think I'm going to law school. And, you know, like having this big, like getting my college roommate to hype me up, you know, tell America it's okay. just tell him. And of course he was fine with it, because he's supportive. He wanted me to get a master's, but to be honest, he didn't really care what it was in. So he was fine. That's what I wanted to do. And he was happy I was just going to graduate school. In retrospect, he would have been happy if I just got a job, you know, whatever. He wanted me to follow what I wanted to do. So ended up applying, getting into this master's program. Do not know what I'm doing. I show up to orientation. Everybody is talking about a thesis. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I really had only looked into the classes. I do not recommend that. I'd only looked into the classes. I didn't really know that many people who had been in graduate school, and certainly not in this field. I just really didn't really know what to look for. I didn't know what I didn't know. I just knew I liked the field of study and wanted to keep learning in it. I had written those senior theses, so that kind of helped, but I still was not, I mean, the person who really helped was my major professor, my advisor, Dr. Mary Elizabeth Curter-Smith. She helped to guide me through that process. And I had worked for a market research firm, which ironically, that was my first job in high school. And actually that ended up really helping. I also worked for a second market research firm in college, in addition to like working for the Phone-a-thon and doing some other work for a bookstore. So long story short, love that master's program. While I'm there, they develop a partnership with the Department of Psychology. So I'm coming full circle back to psychology. My original idea, they developed like a joint PhD program between the Department of Human Development and Family Studies and the Psychology Department at the University of Alabama. Roll Tide. And so while I'm there, I apply, get into the program, thankfully. It was their developmental science program. And I just knew that by then I'd started working as a teaching assistant. I was like, I really like teaching. Like, I really, really, really love teaching. And so I just said, well, I'll go, since there's an opportunity, since I was accepted, I'll go ahead and get this PhD. And then hopefully I can find a job teaching. And so it took longer than I wanted to get that PhD. That's another thing. I went into it pretty ignorant. I did not research how long doctoral programs typically take, PhD doctoral programs. And ironically, you know, I never considered medical school because I was like, who wants to be in school for 4 more years? I don't want to do that. And instead, I turned around and I was in school for like 10 years because I had 4 years of college, 2 years of the master's program, and then it was like another, I don't know, 5 years, something like that, for the doctoral program. So I was in school a long time. I just didn't know what I was getting myself into, but it worked out. First job outside of graduate school. And I did a lot of stuff in graduate school and a lot of random jobs in college and high school, which I'm happy to talk about if anybody has questions about that later. But first job out of grad school, I worked at the University of West Florida in a traditional tenure track position. So I did take that position because kind of the common knowledge is, the common thinking is, if you get a tenure track position, you take it no matter what. Like, you know, almost no matter where it is, as long as it's a school that's got a pretty decent reputation, you take it. But even then, I had been looking at other options. So I had applied to a research policy think tank and got an interview, but I'd already accepted the other job. So I just didn't even participate in the interview, which is, in retrospect, always do the interview, even if you've already accepted the other job. Typically, it's still a good experience. And I had also applied to like a nonprofit position. So I was still thinking about other things. But I took this job anyway because I knew I liked teaching, and it was in Florida. And by that time, I'd spent 10 years in Alabama. So I grew up in Memphis, but I spent all of my college in Alabama. That's where my accent comes from. I did not really pick up the accent in Tennessee, but I picked it up and I never lost it in Alabama. So I was just kind of ready for a change. It was on the beach in Pensacola. I thought, well, what's not to love? I'll get to teach what I love. Now there was that pesky research thing, because even though I was pretty good in the research coordinator position, I had an understanding for research in terms of executing research, but I did not like writing it up for publication. I did not like that. What I did really like was doing stuff in the community. At that time, I was heavily engaged in the community, and I loved teaching. And I think that's kind of what was attractive to Lethan to hire me. And they knew that I had the capability of research. So I got in that position, did really good with the teaching. After my first semester, I was actually still working on my dissertation. So I was working, teaching some classes that I had not even taken myself as an undergrad, because remember, I was a journalism major. So I'd only ever had these classes at the master's level. So I'm like trying to figure out how to teach these things at the undergraduate level. And then teaching some classes that were a little bit outside of my field. In addition to the ones that were more centrally in my field. And then I was on the weekends and nights, I was writing my dissertation, and it was crazy. I got that done though, defended it in October, the first October after I was hired. And after submitting that thing, uploading it, it felt like Christmas morning. Like I had not felt that level of weight come off of my shoulders in like 6 years since I'd been in graduate school, either working on the thesis or working on the dissertation. So that was amazing. Focused on the teaching, but then I was like, oh, I've got to get this program of research going. And so I was always very active in presenting at the National Council on Family Relations. So very active in terms of running the studies and presenting the research and conferences, but I still did not really like spending my time writing it up, especially not after I just finished that dissertation. Writing that all, I just didn't, it wasn't appealing to me. What did happen is I ended up getting some local grants in that area, state and local grants, to kind of do some health education, peer health education programs in town. And that's a longer story than I think we have time for today. But so I was research active in that way, even though I wasn't really writing a whole lot. But as time went on, I was like, ooh, what I am still having to write, even with these grants, I'm still having to supervise master's thesis. And I don't like doing that. So it was essentially like I was writing now not just one thesis or one dissertation, I was helping to write a few of them at once. And sometimes this was literally like, I remember one student, had just had a baby, and I'm sitting up there literally helping while she's dictating, like typing portions of this thing. And I was just like, geez, I've gone from writing one thesis and dissertation, which was a great learning experience, but not something I'd like to replicate, to now writing multiple of them every semester. And even though my students were amazing, I've got one up in some former students now that are just, they're awesome. They've gone on to do great things. And so I'm happy that I got to work with them and help them as much as I could. They were type of students who, even without my help, they would have been fine, but I'm glad I got to help them. But I was like, I love the students, but ooh, I do not want to do this like this. And as I came closer to tenure, I was like, I've got to keep building a program of research. Plus I'll have to continue to supervise these master's theses. And that's just really not where my heart is at. And people would tell me, like some of my colleagues would say, like, Erica, I mean, once you get tenure, then, you can just, I was like, I know, but I'd have to still keep coming back doing this over and over again. Like I literally said, I'd have to still keep coming back doing this job, which, sounds really raw, but I didn't know how to be any more honest. I was just like, this is not exactly how I want to spend my time, even though I was crazy about my colleagues, loved them. They were an amazing group of people to work with. Crazy about my students, but I just was not interested in continuing in that research process in that way. So as I'm coming down on your 5 years, you have to like apply for tenure, and it's a big deal. And I thought, geez, this is going to be a lot of work. And I know I don't actually want to keep doing this indefinitely. This is going to be a lot of time investment here. So I started kind of keeping my eyes softly peeled for other positions. And I would tell people what I was looking for. I remember one of my colleagues, she's like, does that even exist? I said, I really want a clinical assistant professor position in human development and family studies, because that was the other thing. I was working in the psychology department, and psychology, I love it, but my complete heart is in HDFS. Like, psychology is broad. HDFS is broad too, but psychology is really broad. I really like specifically HDFS. And so even though I like the classes I was teaching in the psychology department, I knew that I'd like them even more if I was in that human development and family studies department and got to talk more about that family interaction. So I started just kind of keeping my eyes open. Also, there was another wild card in here. I had been dating someone who I had met in Florida. He was working as an IO psychologist for the Department of Defense, civilian, but for DOD. And then he decided to go back and get his PhD. He had his master's, but he decided to go back and get his PhD. So he applied to different schools. The only schools he got into were in New Jersey and California. I was like, well, I don't want to come visit you in cold New Jersey. So if you're going to pick one between those two, go to the warm California. And so he and I had been in touch and maintained contact while he was in his program as well. And he wasn't 100% sold on coming back to Pensacola because the working options were limited there. I mean, the options were honestly limited for me too. I mean, there was only a couple of schools there. So we literally had a map, and we put dots on the map, the states that we would consider living. All of them were in the southern region because we're wimps and we don't like the cold. Although I do think New England and all of the northern areas, Chicago area is beautiful this time of year. Like we're wimps and we can't take the snow. So Texas barely made it on the map. We had some serious stereotypes about, we didn't know what to expect with Texas. Well, I'm not so sure about that, but I said, well, my dad said something about Dallas is nice. We'll put Texas on there too. We'll at least look in Texas. And then we kind of had said, well, whoever gets a job first, we'll move to that state if it's as long as it's in a large enough city. And so I ended up getting this job offer at the University of Houston. People think I have completely lost my mind when I say that I'm leaving this tenure track position, because it's just not something that you do. You know, if you get a tenure track position, you stay in it because you can get tenure and you don't have a job for life, but there's a relative security there. So it's just not something that you do. You don't often leave them. And I'm like, I'm gonna have to leave because again, like I just knew that I wanted to be doing more teaching. I didn't want to have that weight of the research and feel like I was feeling guilty if I wasn't doing the research. And I just knew that there were other things that I wanted to do. So take this leap of faith, come here. And at this point, I remember one of my mentors, he looked at me, he said, he took me out to dinner, one of our more senior colleagues, after I told him about the job and everything. And he's like, so yeah, he's asking me something about campus. And I was like, I don't know, because I actually haven't seen the campus yet. All my interviews were on Skype. I had 3 sets of interviews on Skype. And he's like, you could just see in his eyes, he thought, where is she going? Like, where is this place? What is happening? But by then I'd already signed on the dotted line before I told everybody. And so he couldn't tell me don't go, but he clearly looked visibly concerned. And I was like, yeah, I know it's weird. They do these Skype interviews. We don't do that now, by the way. We bring people in. So, you know, but they're doing these Skype interviews, but I felt really good about it. So I'm just going to go and just see. And we pulled into town. My now husband and I never visited Houston ever. Like, we had no clue what we were getting into. We're literally like, oh, this is a bigger city than we thought. These people drive really fast here. Like, we're thinking we're going into Cowboys and Tumbleweed, and nope, this is a huge city. And it just ended up working out. We love the city. It's very diverse. I love the diversity of the campus. And then one of the things that I think is really cool is that I kind of took that leap of faith, and there have been a lot of opportunities that have opened up that I never could have known about, that weren't opportunities. You know, since I got here, within the first 2 years, we were able to move on to campus and serve as faculty and residents. That was an amazing experience. It will forever be one of the best experiences of my life. Just like living on campus. We've moved off now, but we spent 3 years on campus. And I didn't have to do any of the mean stuff. I was just like, they had staff to do the mean things, like get on to people who were doing things wrong in the building. I was there, literally there to just be supportive to the students and plan supportive programs. It was the best. You know, it was an addition to my other role as a faculty member. I was still teaching, but it was really cool to have that experience. I'm now the assistant chair of the department. Within a year after being here, I was named the first teaching assistant coordinator of the department. So all these like opportunities became available that I would have never known and that I wouldn't have had access to had I not taken the leap of faith. And I will say, I think overall, I even had taken a little bit of a pay cut when I moved here to come to a more expensive area, you know, so it was truly a leap of faith, but things ended up really working out. And things worked out at UWF too. I greatly value my time at the University of West Florida. While I was there, I got to teach in Japan for a summer, so I don't regret that. And like I said, my students and colleagues were awesome, but ultimately, I think that this is a more longer term fit for us. And it's worked out because my husband can work here too. Not at UH, but it's such a large city, he was easily able to find a job here. So that's kind of my story. Of course, I love the field. I love teaching in the field. I teach some huge classes, some smaller classes. My biggest classes are 163 students. My smallest ones have been down to like 25. And I also have this new love of HDFS careers, and my new obsession is the podcast, the HDFS careers podcast. I've been able to do 15 interviews with that. I was rushing to get the rest of them published before the election because I wasn't sure what my frame of mind would be like after the election. Taking a little break now, but I'll still keep recording and putting new episodes out. And I just love working with students in this field. So that's where I am. I'm happy to take any questions. I love talking about your goals. So whatever you want to ask me about, I'm an open book.
Erica,
Mm-hmm.
you mentioned your podcast. I believe one of the first people you talked to was one of our Redbirds, Lexi.
She is episode 2.
Episode 2.
She's episode 2. And I say like, well, every episode I just did is my favorite episode, but she is still one of my favorite episodes. I mean, yeah, Lexi Greenberg, episode 2, ISU graduate. She's working with, she's working in the, with people with traumatic brain injuries, individuals with traumatic brain injuries. So yeah, if y'all haven't heard, it's just been so cool, y'all, to, I would say if that's one thing that I could do differently, I spent a lot of time, and maybe it's because I was maybe the only kid at home, and 2, I had this computer. I spent a lot of time doing research on the computer, and that's good, but that only gets you halfway there. Like really talking to people about what they do has been so fascinating, and it's what I make my students in my classes do. And they come back and they always say that most of them say that it's a good experience, because that's when you really learn about the reality of the job that you're interested in. But then also you learn about all these jobs that you had never heard of. Like, yeah, before Lexi contacted me, I never heard of that job, that field. And I have just learned so much. The last interview that I published, the most recent one, the guy works in market research. He works in the corporate world, and he's got an HDFS, background. So there's somebody who works at Facebook. I mean, she's high up in Facebook too. I mean, these are people who are applying this knowledge in a variety of different places. So, but yeah, like Lexi, somebody else I interviewed who's working with adults with disabilities and like advocating for them. That was, I think, episode 13. It's just, there's so many different, I love talking to people about what they're doing with our degree. Yeah. Anybody have any questions or seeking advice? I'm here to give solicited advice as well. My blog has unsolicited advice, whatever's off the top of my head. hdfscareers.com is where you can find like the podcast and the blog, but I will gladly respond to any other requests that you have.
I was wondering, like, do you have any tips on applying for grad school, like resume tips or anything like that?
Yes. Well, first of all, my first and foremost tip is definitely get at least one faculty member to read over your personal statement. Now, that's one thing I'm mad about myself sometimes, mad with myself, because sometimes I will agree to write a letter of recommendation. Then I get busy. And then it's like 2 days before the deadline, they've already submitted their personal statement, and I'm looking at their personal statement like, oh no, oh no, I would have definitely told them to change this. Like, oh no, what's happening? And so always, I know that from my own personal experience, when I was applying to graduate school, I at least had the wherewithal to ask for some advice on that, and like get a rough draft together, let them know it's rough. But before you spend too much time in the wrong direction, get some feedback on it, only because it's a little bit different typically than a typical college essay. And I think that there's a lot of common traps that people fall into. You want to be personal and memorable, so you want to let enough uniqueness there, but you don't want to go too personal, and you don't want to be too general and too generic, because then it just kind of washes over. And particularly if you're thinking about applying for a doctoral program, but this also goes for master's programs, but you want to be sure that you have researched the faculty. So like exactly what type of work are they doing, like who you're particularly interested in working with. That especially goes for doctoral programs, but it doesn't hurt for master's programs either to let them know that you've researched the faculty. Because that is the biggest difference too, when you're seeking out a graduate school. With an undergrad, as long as the school's accredited, you're usually fine. You know, as long as they have the major that you want. Usually they're not doing anything too crazy up there. But with the graduate program, and especially if you're talking about a doctoral level program, but even at the master's too, you want to be sure that you're clear on exactly what type of work the faculty specializes in, because that really colors the program. The same program can look really differently in some ways, you know, just based on the faculty's research and the faculty's interests. You know, it can really dictate how you're going to spend your time. I got lucky. I did not know this. I got lucky and ended up with somebody whose specialty was parent-child attachment relationships, but that's not for anything that I knew, you know, so it's important to know that because it can really be, it can feel like a prison if you go and you end up having to work on research that you're not even interested in. Or if you realize at the master's level, oh gosh, I need this license, and they don't even offer it, or their pass rate for the exam is horrible. You know, so these are the questions you want to ask. But in terms of going back to the application, definitely get somebody to read over it. For the resume, definitely utilize your career center, because they're going to be up on kind of the common types of tips in the field. I don't know if ISU has a career center, but I know our graduates, even those who have already graduated, they can continue to use the career center services. So I would definitely, but even don't just stop there, because they can't always catch everything. Have a couple of your friends read over your resume. I even still do that with this last job that I applied for here at UH. I had a couple of my friends and colleagues read over my CV, you know, just because it just helps to have multiple eyes. Once you start to get, you've seen it so many times, you're going to miss things. Otherwise, I would say for the GRE, if it requires a GRE, do prep for it. I was one of those people who sort of always did pretty well on standardized tests. Not genius level well, but I did decently. So I just kind of waltzed in there. I had done a little preparation, but in retrospect, I should have done more, because it is, I do think it's a harder test than like an SAT or an ACT. I will say that. So give yourself at least a couple of months to really study. The method of studying doesn't matter so much. It's just that you pick a method that you're actually going to commit to. Like I had one of these computer programs, CD-ROMs, that worked well for me because I wasn't disciplined enough maybe to commit to the book. So other people had the book. I've heard about these Magoosh programs or something. It's called Magoosh. I don't know how it's spelled, but people have had good luck with that. But I would say prep for that, because even though that's not the only thing they look for, some programs that get so many applications, they have to have a cut point at some point. And, you know, sometimes depending on the pool, how big it is, that just ends up being the most fair way to at least have an initial cut point. And then they look more closely at people who make that initial threshold. For the advice that was told to me, you know, for the personal statement, you do want to tell kind of like a story. You do want to have something in there that they can hook onto and remember, but don't spend. I think that the committee should come away and be able to understand something about a few things. First, they should be able to understand that you have a clear understanding about what you're getting into. You can't completely know what you're getting into until you're in it, but you know, if you're saying you want to work with kids as like a therapist, and they're looking at your resume and you've never had any interactions with children that they can glean or volunteered at any crisis line or done anything related to mental health, you're just saying it because it said you make a certain salary on the little, you know, computer program that spits out results, they might be suspicious of that. So, I mean, I think it helps to really let them know that you're genuinely interested. You genuinely this is why you're interested. And let them know something about your career goals. Let them know about the experience that you do bring to the table. Even if it's on your resume, don't leave it up to them to connect the dots. I always say you help them to connect the dots. Even experience that seems unrelated, Dollar Tree. Is that Yeah, it might seem unrelated at first. No, because you're having to deal with managing conflict with customers. I worked at a bookstore, and one day some customer came in there and was throwing books at us. Yeah, I mean, so you're managing, you're working under high pressure environment. Sometimes you're having to be organized. You're having to interact with diverse populations. You're having to build rapport. You're having to manage stock, whatever it is that you're doing. You don't have to go into all the gory details of that in the personal statement, but I would at least say, hey, in my experiences working with a variety of people, working in customer service, it's really exposed me to a variety of different people. And, this particular thing happened and it made me think blah, blah, blah. I don't know. I just remember telling a couple of stories based on my volunteer experience and work experience to kind of let them know that I had put some thought into it, and that I had some experience working with the populations that I was interested in. I'm too tired. My car even told me that I was tired today, so I can't come up with a really great example, but you kind of get the idea. My car flashed, take a break, and flashed me a coffee sign. So I've got the coffee. I've listened to the car. What else?
Apparently Rosamar knew somebody on faculty who would be willing to look over that stuff for her. If only she could find someone like that.
I know. And at least one.
Yeah.
I think it's helpful to get two. I think it's helpful to get two because you have different perspectives, but you've at least got one for sure. So they should come away with like kind of knowing where you've been, knowing where you want to go, and like knowing what experience you can bring to the table, and knowing that you're serious about it. Don't start it out by, I've always wanted to be a therapist. Don't start it off with that one line. Just don't do that. It happens too many times. But if you can, I think I actually started off telling a story about my uncle who believes he's a child psychologist. He's not. It's a big family joke, but I kind of started off with this, hey, it kind of seems like, this is a field that on the face value, it seems like it's simplistic to some people, but I kind of went into why I know it's complex, and this is what's so interesting about the complexities to me. Let's see. Those are my main ones. Other than I have a blog post about this. This kind of goes without saying. It's a little snarky, but you want to be sure that you use like proper capitalization, punctuation, proofread it. That's becoming something that needs to be said. But it is a formal application. So, do little things like that make a difference too. Thank you for the question. Other questions? How many of y'all are thinking about going to graduate school? Okay. And how many of y'all are like 86 that want to do straight to the workforce? Anybody want to go straight to the workforce? Okay. So since y'all mostly want to do grad school, are y'all thinking like master's level, or are you thinking doctoral level, and what specifically are you interested in?
I'm kind of tossing around both as options.
Okay.
My idea of what I've wanted to do has changed many, many times.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm kind of in a toss-up between the two. I know right now I want to start with my master's and then see where that gets me.
Yeah.
But I ideally want to work with teenagers and young adults, working on either educating them about consent and healthy relationships or about diversity, because I know that both of those topics are lacking in our education system.
Okay. Yeah, that's really cool. I had a colleague who Bill, you might know. Do you know Ebony? Ebony Johnson? No? Okay. She was actually not in our program. They had to take a lot of HDFS programs, so she was in the criminal justice program, but she actually was able to gain some experience working in schools, delivering programming about healthy relationships, healthy relationships. I think it was to like middle schoolers and high school students. And so like she did that for a couple of years while she was in graduate school, but there are opportunities full-time to do that too. Like it was basically a nonprofit who was delivering the services. So like they basically had contracts with the schools, if I remember correctly. And then of course, diversity and inclusion also. So are you thinking of staying are you still in the Illinois area, or are you thinking about?
I am still in Illinois, but I'm looking at grad schools in a couple different states, as well as actually Canada.
Okay, all right. So yeah, so you can find one that really fits your needs and your specialty. That's great. Yeah. Thanks for sharing. What about others? What are y'all thinking in terms of your grad school aims?
Well, me personally, my whole like undergrad, I was like, I'm going to grad school, I'm going to grad school. But like these couple of years, I'm like burned out kind of. So I'm like, I think I need a break. So I'm thinking maybe in the future I'll go back to grad school, but I'm just like confused. And yeah, that's where I'm at right now.
Well, I mean, you're still, where are we at? You're graduating in May? Okay, so yeah, you still have got some time, and you might like end up finding some graduate program that's is very exciting to you, and then that might really spark your interest. Or as I said before, I am a big proponent of like taking some time off to work. The only thing is you got to be sure you don't create a bunch of unnecessary bills for yourself. That's the only thing. People will say, oh, you'll never go back. I don't believe that. No, I knew plenty of people who went back to graduate school. Like, yes, people do. They go back to graduate school all the time. But the key is kind of like not like creating a bunch of recurring bills, like lifestyle bills with a lifestyle that really kind of requires you to keep bringing in a ton of money every month. I think is the key. I think the key is to keep your expenses down. And then you definitely have time to go back. And then a lot of times you can be super competitive. Like one of my close friends, she took, I think, 2 years off and got some experience like working as a research assistant in the lab. And she was able to be super competitive in a doctoral program, worked with somebody with a really strong reputation. So I think it can be a real big help. The key is what you do with that time off. And so, as quickly as possible, and it might not be the first job, and that's fine, but as quickly as possible, you want to like be taking steps progressively towards your interest. So, whatever population or whatever setting it is that you're interested in working in, you want to do everything you can to try and get your foot in the door as close to that mark as possible. And you don't have to know a range of options, and then just kind of get some experience that would be beneficial even when you go back to graduate school. Like, do you have some general idea of like the types of work you like to do or the types of people you'd like to work with?
I was looking, the most that I've looked into is like working somewhere in like the foster care.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. That's the most that I've like actually looked into.
Have you listened to the podcast yet?
I haven't.
Okay. I only asked this because there are 2 interviews where they work for Child Advocates of Fort Bend County here. And so it's a nonprofit that exclusively works with kids in foster care. So that would be it's April Shaver. Which episodes are they? Just look for April Shaver and Crystal Van. If you go to the podcast, like on iTunes, they're pretty early episodes. Crystal's might even be like 3 or 4, but I remember Crystal bartended in college. She did a variety of different types of jobs, and anyway, ended up in this field working in foster care. But again, it goes to the point to where people initially they might think, oh, this is not related at all. And it's like, oh no, you're constantly having to like work in a fast-paced environment, manage different types of personalities, work with diverse populations, different types of people. You never know what table you're going up to, and you have to interact with them. You're building up these skills to work with people, and it served her so well. And she's held a couple of different roles within that agency. So I would take a listen to that. But yeah, you can definitely get experience just at the bachelor's level. She still has a bachelor. Her and April they have bachelor's degrees. One of them might be working on a master's now, but you can definitely get experience in that field. And then if you decide you do want to go back, you might think, oh, I want to go back, but actually the type of the part of the nonprofit that I'm most interested in is actually more of the business side. So you might even decide to get your master's in something a little bit different. And so that's what sometimes working can tell you. You might still want to work in nonprofit, but you want to be more on the business side or the fundraising side, or you might decide you want to be more on the clinical side. So you need a license. So I do think that's where sometimes you can really maximize on that time off, because then it allows you to be even more focused when you go back and get that graduate degree and you're not just getting it in just whatever, you know. I know that we're about like at time, it's 7:26. So I'm happy to answer any more questions, or you can always reach out to me at, our email addresses are so weird here. It's efjordan@central.uh.edu. Probably the easiest way to get to me is hdfscareers.com, and I have a contact me button because we have these long email addresses. So if you ever have ideas for resources or just general questions, or you want to pick my brain, I love talking about students' career plans. So never hesitate to reach out.
And I've known Erica long enough to know that what she just said, she was serious about.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I talk almost too much about it. I will keep you on the line talking about, okay, where could you go? And then don't let me get on the internet and start actually looking for programs or jobs, because that can be a long time unless my toddler interrupts me. Well, I hope you guys have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you
Thank
so
you so
much
much.
for coming.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
It's nice to see smiling student faces and graduate faces. Go grads.
It's nice to just see faces instead of the black blocks with names under them. It's kind of nice.
Exactly. That's what I get a lot of times in my classes. I'm going to log off now and leave you all to any other business that you have to discuss in the last few minutes. And take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.